Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wharton Tech Talks. I'm Steph, your host for today. And today we are joined by Oscar Höglund. Oscar is co-founder and CEO at Epidemic Sound, a global music tech company and leading platform for royalty-free music for content creators. As the go-to choice for content creators of all kinds, videos including music from Epidemic Sound are viewed over 2.5 billion times per day across platforms like YouTube and TikTok. Since Epidemic Sound's inception in 2009, Oscar has led the company's journey from startup to scale-up to unicorn. Prior to Epidemic Sound, he was part of the management team at one of Sweden's leading TV production companies, Zodiac Television, where he co-founded the subsidiary Fifth Element. Oscar holds an MBA from the Stockholm School of Economics and spent a semester at Wharton. Hey, Oscar, where are you calling in from?
Hey, Steph. Thanks for having me. I am calling in from a grey and pretty dreary Stockholm in Sweden.
Love it. Well, that's pretty similar to what it looks like here in Philly right now, a little bit gray. But thanks for joining me. And wanted to start off with just pretty basic, like what inspired you to create Epidemic Sound in the first place?
Sure. For some brief context, I left Wharton in the US, and when I was done with my studies, I moved back to Sweden and I started working as a management consultant at BCG for a couple of years. At my pinnacle, I was a mediocre consultant, and so I realized that that wasn't the life choice for me, and I switched. I did a bit of soul searching, and I was very fortunate enough to stumble upon what turned out to be the love of my commercial life, which is storytelling, because I got introduced to a TV production company called Zodiac Television. And as you just said, we made tons of TV shows. And I got eventually to be responsible for a subsidiary within Zodiac, which was basically like the trash can. It was everything that wasn't traditional regular television. So it was IPTV, mobile TV, interactive television. And then at some point, one of my bosses said, Oscar, maybe YouTube is something like all these cats on skateboards. Perhaps there's an opportunity there. Can you check it out? I started to lean in. I came to discover a couple of different things. And I think that the first thing that we realized was that the internet was at the sort of inflection point of shifting from having been very tech-centric. We felt fairly convinced that it was going to shift and become much more picture-centric. And this was well before Instagram got launched. And then we felt equally certain that over time, it's probably going to transition and be like a very video-centric medium, such that video is going to constitute the majority of all content online. Well, that was our bet and belief, at least. So we thought to ourselves, like, this is a big opportunity. Coming from television, we'd actually stumbled upon two problems which we felt needed solving. And so if you are a TV creator, adding music to your content was really difficult. It was difficult from a legal perspective, from a tech, from a reporting, from a payment, just understanding who owned what was just really broken. And we felt passionately that that was wrong. Like adding music to content ought to be the fun part of the creative process. Like when you cross your T's, you dot your I's, and you get all inspired. And it wasn't the case. And we felt that, we'd like to live in a world where we could change that. So that was on the demand side. That's what people were looking for. So that was one of the reasons why we thought about Epidemic, because we saw that as content creators, like it doesn't work the way the world was set up back then. And then we looked to the other side. So we looked at the supply side, and we saw that on the artist side of the fence, the business model was on paper beautiful because it was centered around royalties. And the idea was that if your music traveled and got played a lot, you'd see a lot of royalties. Great model. We laughed together, cried together, perfectly aligned. But unfortunately, it didn't really work that way. It was a dirty secret. It was kind of like a rigged lottery. The vast majority didn't see any royalties. It didn't get reported because it was analog and the different people in the value chains weren't aligned. And so ultimately, music creators and artists and songwriters were getting paid nothing. And they had to have a second order or a third order job at a Walmart or a post office or something else to make ends meet. And we took issue with that. We said that that's a crappy world where the music industry isn't optimized around music. It's best serving all these intermediaries, and would love to change that. Those were the two problems which were the founding principles of Epidemic. What if we could help construct a world where like adding music to content was easy and fun, and in a way such that artists actually got paid? I'd say it was born out of equal parts frustration, but also like the opportunity at hand.
Thanks for that helpful overview. Since co-founding Epidemic in 2009, how would you say your role and focus areas as the CEO has changed throughout the years?
That's a great question, which I think about quite a bit because as LinkedIn tells me constantly by congratulating me to an additional year at Epidemic, I've been here for 15 years now. And I kind of see it as two distinct different phases. So there's the startup phase and then there's the scale up phase. And it's quite straightforward, in my opinion, to distinguish what phase you're in because during the first 7 years of the company, the last thought in my mind every single evening before I drifted up into sleep would typically be, I wonder if the idea is good enough. I wonder if the principles of beliefs behind Epidemic merit throwing my entire entity, my life, like 80 hours a week, 90 hours, 100 hours a week, everything I have behind this. That's what would be the last thought on my mind every single day. And then gradually over the years, that shifted. Can't point to a specific night or a specific evening or even a specific morning, but I suddenly found myself in a different cycle where the last thought on my mind every single evening was, I wonder if I'm good enough. The transition is that if you run a startup, you think about, I wonder if the idea is good enough. Every single night you obsess around that and you work at the business, work at the plan, work at the product market fit until you get to a point where suddenly you don't think about that. And instead you ask, like, am I good enough? Is the management team good enough? Because obviously the idea works, there's product market fit, but it deserves the best possible circumstances. If you think about whether or not you're the right person or you have the right team, that's like at a 50,000 foot level. I'd argue that's how your role changes. So you go from obsessing around the idea around product market fit to thinking much more about how you want to scale the company, build the company, run the company, and set it up for as much success as possible. So these, I think, would be two distinctly different phases. Then there are tons of nuances and there are sort of many different versions of that. But I think at its core, that's how I'd characterize it.
And from a business perspective, how would you say your priorities have changed? And in my mind, I see that like YouTube has been the primary platform where creators upload their content, but now there are so many new channels popping up, right? There's TikTok, there's Instagram, there's different types of Instagram content from reels to stories. Do you think about those different, I guess, distribution channels of music in terms of the Epidemic Sound strategy?
Yeah, I would argue that we don't just think about them, we obsess about them 24/7. I think it's fair to say that the past 10 years, as they go down in history, are going to be called a lot of things. And some of them are going to be obvious, thinking about the pandemic, about world events, about different elections and how the world has transitioned and changed and evolved. And some would argue degraded, even though I'm an optimist, so I wouldn't. But one of the areas which is less obvious, but is equally true, is that the last 10 years have been an absolute renaissance from a storytelling perspective. There's been so much innovation in terms of online content, binge watching got invented. We went from renting DVDs to streaming shows. We went from a few streaming channels to like a plethora. We went from online content being literally cats on skateboards to becoming the main source of entertainment in many countries around the world. We created long form, we created short form, we created bite size. We went from 15 minutes to 15 seconds of fame. We then got TikTok, which took that to the next level. Let's talk about Twitch live streaming content as well. We can talk about X, formerly known as Twitter. There's been so much innovation and revelation as it relates to storytelling that I think that's sometimes forgotten. To your question, did that go unnoticed? Absolutely not. That was the entire fundament of our business. We said that the internet is going to become this repository of our species culture and all of our expression. That's where we're going to go for not just banking and meeting a doctor and shopping, but it's where we hang out with our friends, express ourselves, entertain ourselves, educate ourselves. And we saw quite early on that all of this is going to center around video for a fairly straightforward reason. So we went to first principle and we said that we think that as a species, video is the best way for us to communicate because it carries more information than both pictures and text. On top of that, it also carries emotion. And so you put those two together and then video becomes a very compelling format. We knew that it was going to transition into a multitude of different forms of expressions, both length, purpose, live, not live, linear, one-off, on demand, all of the above. And the idea behind our business was, let's see if we can become the company that soundtracks the internet, and not just one vector of it. We'd like to try and soundtrack all of it. And in doing that, you can't be prescriptive. Rather, you need to try and set yourself up as a platform such that you understand all the different creators, the different user cases, and even more importantly, all the different creator user flows, such that we have a huge amount of our customers come directly to us and they sign up to our music innovation platform, and they use our music and our data and our tools, and they use our mobile app, some of them as well. But a huge part of them also sign up indirectly through all the other platforms that we power. So you go to Getty or Adobe or Canva or Pinterest, like our music runs these platforms as well. We've made sure to integrate ourselves everywhere, because if you ultimately want to be the company that soundtracks the internet, you need to be where content creation happens, and not just on one platform or in one format, but across all of them.
And how do you serve the unique needs of customers anywhere from YouTube creators to advertisers?
I think it's about a couple of different things. I think that first off, there is a universal desire that needs to be met in terms of what all of these storytellers need and what they want. I think that one way of trying to characterize that is, if you think about content and video, it's similar to food in the sense that food without taste is just empty calories. But food with taste and flavor, on a good day, it becomes memorable. On a fantastic day, it becomes unforgettable. And the analogy here is that music to video is just like flavor and taste to food, such that video without any music is never going to be memorable, and you can forget about it being unforgettable because you don't connect with people's emotions. And so it's just empty calories. That's one of the universal parts of it. And so breaking that down then across different user cases and different ICPs, as they're known as, of individual customer profiles, you understand that there are a few similarities as to the ones I just alluded to, but then the different user cases are dramatically different from each other. Some produce massive amounts of content. It's all about speed, and they want automation and the job to be done. Some produce labors of love that take a long period of time, and they're looking for something distinct, incredibly unique. Some people want help through data and recommendation. Some people need help with adapting the content and making sure that it proliferates across the entire world. And in other areas, you want to regionally box stuff such that it only spreads in, say, Korea or in Istanbul or whatever platform you might be optimizing for. So understanding what they all share in characteristics and building around that. But then on top of that, making sure they utilize and you build out product tools and product sets such that you can cater to all the different and the distinctly different user cases and user needs of creators.
Mm-hmm. And on the musician side, you mentioned that musicians and artists often need to take on that second or third job to sustain their livings. Have you seen ways in how Epidemic Sound has really impacted musicians and allowed them to focus on music solely in their lives?
Yeah, very much so. And I think that if I take a step back and I try and explain it, I would probably start from a compensation perspective. Because what we saw was that the traditional music industry was centered around this notion of representation, such that you can think of a specific track almost like a cap table. That track had a cap table, and there were multiple different shareholders who held different percentage points of that track. You'd have an artist, you'd have a record label, a publisher, a PRO, a neighboring right organization, you'd have the studio musicians, you'd have the producer. There was a long list, and they all held percentage points. And they had two things in common. One was that they all had veto rights. Unless they were all happy with the outcome of the commercial negotiation, they could veto a track such that it couldn't be used in a video or in a commercial or in a piece of content. And the second thing that they all shared in common was that they hated each other typically with a passion, because they all felt underseen or overutilized or underpaid. You can imagine that whole structure didn't serve the music industry very well as content creation started to really take off during the last 10 years. With that insight, we came up with a different compensation model, which we built around 4 core principles. And the first one was incredibly disruptive, I think maybe is the word I could use, because we said that we'd like to acquire 100% of the rights and move away from the representation model. We want to own all of the rights to the music, but we're willing to pay for it upfront. We'll pay you thousands of dollars for the track such that we own it. That would be sort of compensation point number one. We put our money where our mouth is, and suddenly we guaranteed all artists who were not accustomed to being paid up front, because they'd always been told you might get royalty, but nobody gets anything up front unless you're Taylor. We started paying up front, and that really made an impact, because suddenly we were known as the company who were helping and serving musicians and taking away anxiety and uncertainty. Part number two was that we tied a new royalty system to that, such that we're looking to serve content creators and they pay for a subscription with Epidemic. And we said that the pro rata share of tracks that you provide that get downloaded will create a bonus pool encompassing millions of dollars, such that you'll get your pro rata share. So if your sound beds, if your tracks, if your vocals get downloaded quite a lot, there's a mobile component or a versatile component on top of the upfront payments. And that really made artists pay note, for they're like, okay, so we're guaranteed money up front and we get a proportion of some usage. That's super interesting. And then we took it two steps further, because what we then did was we were super fortunate because we stumbled upon something. It turned out that as our business scaled and became really large, we started to soundtrack huge proportions of the internet. We reach 2.5 billion people every single day now with our music. And as such, we have massive reach and huge distribution. And comments started racking up in the millions, where people were watching videos produced by our generation's most prolific storytellers, and they were hearing our music, and they were asking the content creators, I love the music you're using. I want to listen to this on Spotify when I build my models, or when I do my financial engineering, or when I pull an all-nighter, but I can't find it anywhere. And that was simply due to the fact that we hadn't uploaded it everywhere, because we were hell-bent on soundtracking the internet. Eventually, we got convinced, and so we uploaded all of our music to Apple Music and to Deezer and to Spotify and all the other music streaming platforms. And we came to understand that we'd stumbled upon one of the largest and most efficient mechanisms for launching new music in the world, such that we would put our music into a Mr. Beast video. He would generate hundreds of millions of views. A subset of those viewers would go over to Spotify, start listening to said track. So that would generate millions of dollars of revenue. And we would collect that because we're restriction-free, not necessarily royalty-free. But then we collected all that money and we took a look at ourselves in the mirror and said, what would be the right thing to do here? And we said, well, it's probably the right thing if we believe in partnering with the musicians and we've acquired the tracks, they're ours. We'd still like to share the royalty revenue 50-50 with our music creators. So we added that on top. So we started sharing all the royalty revenues, which started to scale and become very significant. Suddenly, artists were making much more money than they've ever made before, because we were sharing 50-50 splits, which is very uncommon in the music industry. And then to top it all off, on top of that, we added the same incentive program that we have for all our employees, such that artists were allowed to acquire shares in Epidemic if they were providers. So we aligned our long-term incentive with their short-term incentive as well. And so this four-pronged approach was a complete game changer if you're an artist, such that in the early days, we had hundreds of artists who wanted to work for us. That number has now exploded and is in, tens of thousands any given month. You need to basically be an Emmy Award winner, or at least a nominee, to have any chance to get to produce music for us, because the level of quality is at such a very high global standard that our music, we're very proud of the artists that we get to work with and the quality that we get to provide to the content creators of the world.
Yeah, and I imagine that putting your money where your mouth is and offering that 50-50 split and sharing that with creators naturally attracts more creators, because they see that Epidemic Sound supports them and has their best interest in mind as well.
You could almost see it as a two-sided marketplace, where the flywheel that started to work for us was we got to work with better and better artists because we compensated them much more handsomely than anyone else, such that the storytellers started to accrue in bigger and bigger numbers because the music was so great. Their content created much more distribution, much more viewership that generated even more money that enabled us to work with even better artists, and off went the flywheel.
Right. That's a great snowball effect.
Yeah, it's been very significant over the years. Still is.
Mm-hmm. And I know you recently signed, or Jordan Sparks signed with you. How did that come about?
Signing Jordan was a great moment for us because For the longest time ever, we've been looking to really establish ourselves as a partner to the creative industries, both the storytellers and the content creators, but also to artists. And I can say that for a long time now, if you've been a less well-known artist, it's been incredibly beneficial to work with us for said distribution. And with Jordan, we wanted to try and see if, even if you're an established artist, does our model push the needle? Does it make a difference? We recorded a couple of tracks with her, which were centered around Christmas. So we launched them in late November, early December. And we saw massive uptake, both amongst storytellers, but then also downstream as it relates to streaming and awareness. And we saw just the amount of streams and the amount of interest around Jordan just spiked quite dramatically. For us, this was a great way for us to showcase to ourselves, to Jordan, and to sort of everyone we work with, especially in the US, that this now works. This works at scale, and it works for super large established artists as well. That's one of the reasons why we were so excited on her behalf, on our behalf, and all the content creators we work with, because we were able to prove that this distribution flywheel is very real and it's very functioning.
Mm-hmm. One of your innovations is really that subscription-based model when it comes to music licensing. Can you share how that is different from traditional licensing?
Yeah, I get this question quite a lot, as you can imagine, and I'm going to try and provide a completely different answer. So bear with me now if this is a complete crash and burn. As my accent gives away, I'm a Swede, right? So I'm going to try and do a Swedish reference. So imagine if the traditional music industry ran IKEA. Okay, picture that in your mind. And you go to IKEA and you're looking to buy a desk chair. And you find a great desk chair, you go to the checkout, and the person in the cashier scans it, and you want to pay for it. And you say, how much is this? And they go, okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions before I can tell you how much this chair costs. And you look a bit surprised and you say, okay, who's going to be sitting on this chair in the future? And you go, what do you mean? I'm buying this for myself. Yeah, but can you guarantee that it's only yourself that's going to sit in this? Do you maybe have a spouse, a partner? Do you have friends? Do you have kids? Oof, yeah, I have a family. Okay, so can we say maybe 6, 7 people? And you go, why does that matter? Well, it determines the price. The more people that are going to sit in the chair, the more you have to pay for it. Mm-hmm. And you go, okay, that's inconvenient. Okay, let's say 7 for argument's sake. Okay, cool. Next question. Where in the house is this chair going to be? I think it's going to be in the living room. Yeah, but is it the living room or the dining room? Because depending on what room you're going to put the chair in, I'm going to charge you a premium. Is it on the top floor or on the bottom floor? Is it in the basement? And you go like, this is weird. I might move the chair. Yeah, I'm going to charge for multiple rooms in that case. And you go, wow, okay, this is weirdly complicated. And then you go, okay, are we done? And no. What do you think you're going to write at the desk while sitting in the chair? Is it going to be a successful novel? Because in that case, I want a portion of what that novel is going to generate. And you go like, give me a break. Are you kidding me? And without exaggeration, like that's kind of how the traditional music licensing industry worked. You had to tell them exactly what platform, who's going to watch it, when, how successful, what are you going to tie it to? And it was next to impossible to license music, especially as the world shifted from a few pieces of content on linear television and exploding that into billions of pieces of content that get distributed across all platforms, all corners of the world, some becoming super successful, most garnering no interest whatsoever. So we looked at all of that and we turned it on its head. We said that let's turn this into a subscription business. Let's do the thing that makes the most sense to us from both an artist perspective and from a consumer perspective, which is let's acquire all the rights. Let's bundle everything into a subscription. If we can guarantee that we hold all of the rights ourselves, something very interesting happens. We can suddenly then warrant to all of our users, our customers, that yes, you can use this track anywhere. You can write whatever novel you want, sit in whatever chair, in whatever room, in whatever part of the world. You can even move. And you're always only ever going to be charged $15 per month. Oh, and by the way, we have tens of thousands of tracks and you can use all of them as much as you like. That was a complete game changer in terms of it wasn't 10% more easy to understand. It was 10x easier. But as you can imagine, creating that experience for an end customer had to really push ourselves to be super innovative on the product side, the pricing, the licensing, the tracking, such that we take something very complicated and we make it very, very simple for the end user.
Yeah, the transparency and simplicity that you offer through that must be so valuable for not only the musicians, but also the creators.
Yep.
We have to touch on the hot topic these days, AI. What is your view on the role that AI plays in terms of the music creation and selection process for musicians and creators?
I'd say that the role of AI has been crucial for the last 5 years from our perspective and just continues to be so. If I take a step back and I look at the industry as a whole, AI does two things on a macro level. One, it introduces efficacy and efficiency such that we can tag our music in a more efficient way. We can write up our agreements in an easier way. We can identify customers. We can identify engagement. So AI sort of really supercharges our business that way. On top of that, AI also dramatically increases our TAM because as AI gets deployed across companies like Getty, Adobe, Canva, Pinterest, the barriers to content creation come down quite dramatically. So instead of there being hundreds of millions of people who are inclined to make a video, suddenly there are billions of people because AI has made it so much easier for them. There's a very macro positive effect on AI. If we then drill down one layer beneath that, AI can be very powerful and it can also be very detrimental to your business depending on how you're set up. So I would argue that there are three components which are going to determine whether or not you are a net winner or net loser in an AI world. So the first thing that you would need, as I would put it, is like a unique data set. If you have proprietary data, which is in great quality at massive scale, and which is very, very rich in signal, I think that's super valuable. And from our perspective, I would argue we stumbled upon this, so I can't take credit for it. But because we built this restriction-free catalog for the last 15 years, we've built the world's largest repertoire of a full-scale catalog with all the music specifically split out into stems across 180 genres, only engineered towards helping content creators soundtrack content. So you need a database. Number two, I would argue, is that you need access to LLMs, the models that you can sort of populate and use your data to fine-tune the LLMs. And as these move into more and more open source, they're more and more accessible to more and more people. And as they converge, that sets everyone up for more success. Which then leads me to the third point. I think the third thing that you need is distribution. Because unless you have massive reach and distribution, you're not going to get access to the reinforcement learning loops that you need in order to help train your data sets and help provide input to your models, such that since we reached 2.5 billion people every single day, when we started pushing stuff out, we could immediately see what resonated, what people liked, what they shared, what they skipped, what they downloaded, what they altered, and what they changed. So I think that that's the framework with which we think about AI and sort of how you should think about that in the music space. And then you can plot traditional music labels in there and publishers and startup companies. And typically they have either a catalog or they have distribution. It's very seldom that they have both. And even if you have catalog, odds are that it's a bit like a Swiss cheese in the sense that there are tons of holes in it. The record label has a few rights, publishers have a different, the estates of artists have a third, and like neighboring rights have a fourth. It's quite complicated. Mm-hmm. And then you trickle that down to what are the problems and the value you're looking to create for the end customers. I'd say it's less about generative music per se, even though that definitely has a role in this. But I think that recommendation becomes a huge thing. If you're looking to create content and bring it to life, using AI to help recommend the right audio for the right content is crucial. That's something where we've invested a lot during the last couple of years, such that you can provide us with a video now and we'll use AI to determine what's in this video. We can then go through the last decade of all the content we've ever soundtracked, bringing in billions of data points per day, and say that this is the music that's going to resonate. These are the sound effects. These are the segments. This is how you should build the drama. This is what you should do. We can do that with video. We can do that with text. We can do that with sound. I think the recommendation is a huge part of where AI has a massive role to play and already does. And the other part is, I'd say, adaptation. Getting a 3-minute track to suit your 15-second TikTok can be an ordeal. That can take a significant amount of time. And it's difficult from a legal perspective, technical perspective, distribution, workflow. Bringing down those barriers and reducing that friction, there too, AI has a huge role to play.
There is also a rise in AI music generators. What are your thoughts on that? And is there any worry around that potentially being a threat to the royalty-free music that you can find on Epidemic Sound?
I think that the first thing I'd say is that everyone needs to be paranoid in a healthy way or to a healthy extent. And what I mean by that is humans have ruled the earth, been top of the food chain, and it's been predicated not on us being the fastest animal, nor us being the strongest animal, but it's because we've been the smartest animal. And we've now decided to introduce something smarter than ourselves on top of the food chain. If history is a precursor and you turn to sort of what happened to the Neanderthals who were the step beneath the Homo sapiens, we didn't live happily ever after with them. They got extinct. And so I would argue, in general, we should all be excited, but also a bit careful. More specifically, I think that as a business, if you're not constantly paranoid, the non-paranoid people got eaten by the dinosaurs. There's a lesson in that. So I would argue as an entrepreneur, you're always paranoid and you're always second guessing. And sticking that, if you dive into it, I think that there are a couple of different things, as I alluded to before. A lot of these startup companies, they tend to have incredibly skilled individuals, but they typically tend to struggle both as it relates to distribution, such that they don't have customer bases, they can't get signal, they can't put their music to good use, nor do they own data sets themselves. So they train off the same repertoire that other people have, and they end up sort of blending towards the mean, such that that music isn't distinctive. The value of it decays down to zero as it gets competed away. I'd say that I have both of those perceptions. So one being staying calm, keeping our eye on the ball, doing what we do, but at the same time being super paranoid and making sure that we're on top of what's happening, hiring the right people, looking at acquiring the right companies, building the right features, building the right product sets ourselves, staying very attuned with the industry, but I'd say more so with our customers. The world doesn't need more shitty music, just as little as it needs more shitty video. You need the right music or the right video such that it can be tamed and tailored and adapted to your specific needs. And I think that that's where you need to be mindful about how can you do that such that you help storytellers and not just present them with even more music, even more choice. Because when we launched Epidemic 15 years ago, a quick Google search and you'd find the free music archive or you'd find the Creative Commons. And there were literally 25 million tracks, which were completely for free. People are always telling me that, aren't you stressed now that the marginal cost of music is approaching zero? And I go, I'm stressed for many reasons, but not for that reason, because the marginal cost for music has been zero ever since we started. It comes down to customer service, brand, pricing, convenience, quality concerns, ease of use, branding. There are so many other components of what it is people actually buy. So getting that all right, that keeps me up at night because we're not alone running towards trying to solve all of that. I think you need to be a bit paranoid.
I think that's a great segue to our next section, which is more about your story and career. How do you strike that balance between staying paranoid and on your toes and staying ambitious and focused on achieving your entrepreneurial vision?
The older I've become, the more experienced I've become at running companies. I very much now see my role as a part of a super simple equation. And the equation is talent times execution equals output. And output, let's put that down to revenue and profits. And in the early phases of a company, you don't have the luxury to focus on one side of that equation. You need to focus on all of it. And you need to over-index on the right side of the equation, as in you obsess about the revenue and the underlying profitability of your business because you have a very tight runway. You have a small margin for error and you don't really have product market fit. So that's where you spend the majority of your time as a younger, more junior CEO and a co-founder or founder. As the business scales and matures, you take one step to the left. You start seeing that I should be spending more of my time around execution. What's the strategy? What are the processes? What are the products? What are the things that we're building? I'm not saying that you don't do that initially. You do that all the time, but you're spread quite thin. But you take a step back and you make sure that you can spend as much time as possible in the execution phase. And you say that if we nail execution, the outcome will follow because it's like the outcome is a sequential outcome of the other things. My role today, I would argue, is even one step further removed because now my management team, the C levels at Epidemic, they are ultimately responsible for everything that has to do with execution. And my role is all about talent. That's the first thing that I think about when I wake up. It's the last thing that I think about. I see myself, if you've been, what's the American equivalent? Cancun, spring break is like the equivalent. So if you ever go to the south of Europe on a vacation, you'll find these streets where there are bars and there are people who throw people into their bars, like the opposite of a bouncer, like a puller or something. And that's kind of how I see my role. My role is to pull talent into my bar, which is Epidemic. It's the only thing I obsess about because getting the average level of talent and quality up is my number one priority. That's how my thinking on a very, very high level has shifted over the years. And of course, there are way more nuances to it, but it kind of gives a sense of how I think about it, I guess.
I love the formulaic approach to this. Really appreciate that as an MBA student. When it comes to talent, what skills do you look for? Hard skills and soft skills?
I don't want to say it differs because that's too lame of an answer. So I'll try and be a bit more specific. One of my investors is Blackstone, and one of their executives sat on my board, and he gave me a great piece of advice a few years ago. And he says, Oscar, your number one job now is to conduct the orchestra. And that's how I think about talent. I think that I have all these incredibly talented multi-instrumentalists who can play both the drums, the violin, they can create beats, some of them can sing. Some of them love playing offense, some of them love playing defense, even though that's a weird metaphor in music, but I get away with it, I hope, because I'm a non-American. And I think that my job is to try and put the orchestra together such that the people who are responsible for the beat have specific sets of skills that I need them to be very, very in tune with. The people who are doing the solo, like the pianist or the violinist, they need to not crack under pressure. They don't need to be good all the time, but when it's time for the solo, it needs to just fly. Then there are sort of different voices, different people who have different roles to play. And the orchestra is constantly changing because there's a different auditorium you're playing to and there are different needs and it evolves over time. So I see it as a pretty dynamic structure. And it's one that is also obviously, if I'll stick to this analogy and make it almost absurd, there are new instruments being invented all the time. So we can't just play with the cello and the oboe because suddenly somebody's built a beat machine or sort of they've invented a keyboard or an electric guitar or something even more progressive. So you need to adapt constantly and see how do we want to infuse that into the orchestra. But sort of conducting the orchestra is how I see it and adapting the different skill sets to the different individuals. But at its core, it all comes down to talent. Like working and understanding the talent density in your team and also the gaps and where the strongholds are, I'd say that's crucial to planning and being successful. And ultimately to your question, like surviving as a CEO, I only hire people smarter than myself, which is unfortunately quite easy for me to do. You need to be of that inclination such that you hire smart people who are inclined to tell you what to do as opposed to the opposite. Because if I'm the talent cap, if I'm the smartest person in the room, something has gone very, very wrong.
If you were to describe or define what your leadership style is, how would you do so?
Sticking with weird metaphors, I've been described as an avocado. And what I mean by that is when you squeeze an avocado, it seems all soft, but at its core, there's a massive rock solid, what's the word name? Is it pip?
Pit, I think, or...
Yeah, so the core. And I'd say that's how my leadership style is. I try and be obviously non-hierarchical, which is a very Swedish trait, very inclusive, easy to laugh, take my work seriously, but not myself, while at the same time maintaining a very, very clear understanding within the team and within the company that we're not doing this for shits and giggles. We're in it to win it. I want to have a good time, but sort of, I hate losing. We're here to try and soundtrack the entire internet, and it's huge.
And growing.
Yeah, and growing, right? We have a decent start, but back to your point, I'm quite paranoid. We need to be constantly looking over our shoulder. We need to create a culture where I want people to work at Epidemic and feel that towards the end of their career, I'd love for them to feel that I did my best work in my career at Epidemic. They created this perfect environment of, to some extent, psychological safety. There was an openness to ideas. They were intellectually honest and curious. They were wildly ambitious. We could stand on the shoulders of giants like innovation through music and technology. We found ourselves in this Cambrian explosion, which is of AI and everything is possible. And we just really exerted as much effort as we could towards solving one thing, which was soundtracking the internet. That's what I'd love, and that's what I try and instill. It's a balancing act because it can't get too serious, can't get too much stick, and you can't only have carrot. You need to try and strike that balance.
You seem to have a really clear understanding of your own leadership style. What would your advice be for listeners that are looking to define and practice their own leadership styles?
I'm 100% advocating finding your style. Don't try and replicate somebody else's style.
Mm-hmm.
What worked for person X isn't going to work for person Y. And so I'd say that as it comes to leadership, lean into your skills and then complement your management team with people who can complement you. As an example, I think that if you think about leadership across the spectrum, there are different areas. Some people lead by being inspirational, some by being incredibly scientific, some love large groups, some are good with smaller groups. And I'm sure that there are 50 different ways you can split leadership up. But understanding where you are really strong, doubling down on those areas such that you cultivate and build them. To some extent, I think you need to be open to that in some of these areas, you need to get to a minimum level such that you're not sort of disqualified from participating. Like you can't be an asshole because it doesn't matter if you're super inspirational, people will eventually get fed up. And so I think you lean into your superpowers and then complement yourself such that you have different tools. Nobody wants to bring a knife to a gunfight, right? You can send in the alpha female into one scenario or the super sort of cerebral person into the second one, and wildly inspirational, the kick-ass negotiator, the hard as nails person. I think, again, back to the whole idea of an orchestra, I think you need to think about leadership in that way as well, because as your business scales, you're going to need people who love playing offense. Some people love playing defense. Some people are tactical. Others are strategical. Some are cerebral. Some are emotional. And you need to map your leadership style such that you can get everyone singing from the same sheet, such that you don't talk to the MBA students or not only to the engineers or just to the artists or the A&R part of the business. So I think that's quite important.
Yeah, and you touched a little bit on this, but would you say it's better to focus on and lean into your strengths 100% or also try to improve on your weaknesses or a combination of both?
I took a break from university almost 2.5 decades ago. So I quit the numbers for a while and I studied theoretical philosophy and the ancient Greeks. Great course. Don't remember anything except for one piece of advice, which was there are only two kinds of problems in the world, Oscar. And the term they used was a satisfaction problem or an optimization problem. And the difference is if it's a satisfaction problem, once you get to a satisfiable result, there are immediate diminishing returns to investment on that. Like a bus fare, it's $10. Like you can negotiate for 10 hours, it's still going to be $10. Just identify that you need to get to a point where it's satisfied and then you just leave it. And then there's an optimization problem, which is like a pitch. So if you're doing a pitch for an important client, probably spending 10 hours is going to yield better results than spending 2. And if 10 people spend 10 hours, odds are you're going to win that pitch as opposed to somebody who's been one person for 10 hours. Identifying what problem you're looking at has been one of my sort of key asks of myself or something I try to do. And the reason I bring it up now is because I think it's very, very relevant to your question. As you get to know your different skill sets, I think the areas where you're weak, you need to identify that this is a satisfaction problem. I need to get that trait up to a satisfactory level. After that, I have diminishing returns or I'm at a disadvantage in terms of becoming very empathetic or very intellectual or sort of very visionary. However, if my strength is I'm a storyteller or I'm very cerebral, then that's the optimization problem. That's where I should really try and become the best version of myself, because then I can liaise with other people who can complement, who have the inverse, like what's their optimization skill and what's their satisfactory skill. So that's how I think about it.
What advice do you have for anyone, especially MBA students, looking to break into the music and tech space?
A couple of things come to mind. One is, if possible, go in early such that you don't have alternative costs which are too high. I think that one of the most dangerous traps to put yourself in is to get a job, start earning a decent living, become accustomed to that way of lifestyle, such that your costs prohibit you from taking risks and doing other things. I have this sense of there are two different kinds of jobs. Some jobs you earn, some jobs you learn. And I think there's an order. You need to take a job first, such that you learn before you can build something where you can earn. My own experience going into television, the first job I took, I went from BCG, where I made a ton of money in relative terms. I was super happy and I thought I had a cushy lifestyle. I could go out and eat and I could go on vacation. But I was profoundly unhappy. I wasn't very good at being a management consultant. So I eventually left. Unfortunately for me, this happened early in my career. So I hadn't gotten used to making a lot of money. And I switched and I started working with TV production, where I took a massive haircut in terms of salary and in terms of prestige. All my friends thought that, what are you doing? Like, you're a moron. And for me, it was a no-brainer because it was so much fun. But I made zero money in TV production. But I was like a sponge. I was constantly the guy saying, why? Why are we doing that? What does this mean? Help me understand this. So that was a job where I just learned. And I did that for a couple of years. It was way more fun. Even though I was making less money, it didn't bother me because it was fun. I made TV shows and I got to be in weird scenarios with people with pink hair. It was just crazy fun. After a while, I came to understand that I know stuff now. I can see the matrix. I can see around corners. I can utilize my number skills, which nobody else has, into this creative context. We can start to build things. Between Zach and myself, we started building companies. And that's when you switch from learning to earning. We built multi-channel networks. We built production companies. We built gaming companies. We built music companies. And that's when things really started to hit. So I think that would be my number one piece of advice. Try and get in early. Try and adapt your burn such that, pardon my French, but shit, that stuff doesn't make you happy. Doing good work with fun people, that makes you happy. So be willing to trade that short term and have that mindset. Is this a job where I want to learn or a job where I want to earn? Plan your career according to that, perhaps.
Yeah, that's really insightful. I think a lot of MBA students that are at these inflection points in their career, this will really resonate with them, I think.
And I recognize it's difficult, right? Wharton, as an example, is a very expensive education and you typically have to finance it. And so you're left with debt. I think that there are ways around it. I think that there's so much opportunity now, especially I think that we've touched upon AI. There have been times in my career when people have been, in my opinion, just underwhelming in terms of, I wish I would have been around when the internet was born. There was so much opportunity. It was so much easier building a great company then. It's all been done. Mm-hmm. And then mobile happened. And like, I wish I would have been around when mobile happened. That's when Mark built Facebook and that's when X, Y, and Z happened. Like, but I missed that. So I can't possibly be asked to build something as impactful. We're in the most pivotal platform shift ever, right? Web was great, mobile's great, but AI, I think, might be on a completely different level. Throw yourself at that. Like, now is the best time ever to be smart and young. And if you can keep your costs down such that you can, imagine joining the next Google early. I don't want to use NVIDIA as an example because I don't know that company whatsoever, but imagine just being early into those companies that got built like a while back. The next generation of those companies are being built here and now. Mm-hmm. It's yours to lose, basically.
Super inspirational. Thank you for that. All right, well, let's close off with some rapid fire Q&A. Who's your favorite artist these days that, let's say, isn't on Epidemic Sound yet?
I'm a huge fan of listening to music which is non-English. In small, like Portuguese, Swedish, if you want to, dialects, and picking up music that doesn't really make sense to me. I'm a fan of that. But it doesn't really make sense to drop those names. So I think the artists which are cool, which are inspiring, I'd mention Pharrell Williams is one. He's so wide, so versatile, has so many different ways of creating, so many different ways of expressing himself. So he's very inspirational, I find. And then I'm going to have to mention Taylor Swift. I think that she's a force for nature in general. I think that what she's done in terms of re-recording music and pushing the envelope is super cool. And as a father of three, whereof two are daughters, like, I love what a kick-ass woman she is, and she's such a great role model. So those would be the two.
Awesome. And what about your favorite artist on Epidemic Sound right now?
I never answer that question because it's a bit like asking
your favorites.
Who's your favorite kid?
Yeah.
You're not going to trick me there, but I will say this. I love everything with lyrics. Lyrics is the thing for me. I love poetry. I love spoken word. Music that tells a story, I think, is amazing. It just makes the experience just multiples more interesting to listen to.
What is a non-negotiable that you have as part of either your morning routine or night routine?
So morning routine, I don't eat breakfast. I'm trying the whole intermittent fasting, and I have been for a few years. I don't know if it works. I save time, I save energy, and I like being hungry. Lunch becomes great. If you're hungry, it goes from being this mundane must-fill body with energy to being something that your entire essence yearns for. I think that's a great feeling. So people are, in my opinion, in general, too afraid of being hungry. I love it. And in the evenings, I'd say under no circumstances ever does a cell phone or computer make its way into the bedroom. Ever. That's non-negotiable.
That's impressive for someone that works in like the media tech space.
But I think that the older I get, it sounds like I'm super old, which I am, but the older I get, I think that success is a function of time. I think the best tennis players in the world, I'm going to get the stats wrong, but I'm going to take a shot at it anyway. Great tennis players, I think, win 52% of all the balls that they ever play. So it's just marginally more right than wrong. And yet over time, they become the world's best tennis player like Federer and Nadal. And I think the same is true with building companies. The only rule is to don't die. Just keep on doing marginally more good things than bad things, week in, week out, week in, week out. That's what success looks like. That's why I think it's so important to be very diligent about routines and about setting rules up, because if you're not set up for a marathon, you're not going to be successful. Nothing good, in my opinion, was built under 7 years. You have to be prepared to at least put 7 years. And I'm dumb, so it's taken me 15 to get to where we are now. I think that setting yourself up so that you can endure is probably the most important thing.
Yeah, and I appreciate that perspective because I think a lot of people see those like overnight success stories, and often that is not true.
Yeah, we're an overnight success, but it took 15 years to get there.
What is a personal goal that you have set for yourself this year?
Discipline, sticking to discipline. Like I have a very clear, I don't do meetings before 9 in the morning because I want to spend time with my family and kids. Come home at 6. I never do meetings between 6 and 9 because that's family time. Never work during the weekends. Try and keep a regime in terms of exercise and hanging out with family and friends and spending time in nature. It sounds like I'm pulling it off. I'm pulling it off. My commitment to myself is trying to stick even more discipline. I think discipline is great.
And that can be useful from both a professional and personal place too.
Absolutely. There are two sides of the same coin. Discipline helps you in both respects.
And last question, what is your bold prediction in how you see Epidemic Sound continuing to evolve in the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
I think it would be amazing if Epidemic evolved into a verb from a music perspective. Like you search for something, you Google it. If you want to go somewhere, you Uber it or you take an Uber. I'd love to be synonymous with soundtracking the internet, such that if you're an artist, like you should just Epidemic it. That's the launching platform for all talent. If we become that synonymous, because we were super secretive the first 10 years of our company, we didn't do any interviews, let alone podcasts like this, because we wanted to build moats. We wanted to fail in splendid isolation. We wanted to get to a point where we hopefully hit escape velocity before everyone or anyone knew what we were doing. Trying to change that and becoming much more of a household brand amongst content creators and musicians, that would be very cool in my opinion.
I can see you already starting to get there.
I don't know about that. We're trying.
Every YouTube video I watch, I see like Epidemic Sound in the credits and the drop-down description.
Yeah, we're trying. We're soundtracking about 20% of all of YouTube, but that leaves 80% to go. Plenty of work to be done.
Well, you really do balance that humbleness with the ambition.
Thank you. I'm trying. Not so much on the humble side, that comes naturally, but trying to get the ambition right. Trying to get where we want to go.
Right. That wraps up our time for today. Thanks so much, Oscar, for joining me, and we look forward to following Epidemic Sound's growth moving forward.
Thank you, Steph. It was a pleasure, and I'd love to end on a shout out. Anyone listening to this who's interested in what we do, please just reach out, epidemicsound.com. As I said, we're always looking for talent. Come join the band.
Thank you.